was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of evening that made everything feel slow, like the world itself was winding down. Cars hummed softly along the street, neighbors walked their dogs, and the faint sound of a distant ice cream truck played a tune that felt oddly nostalgic. Inside a modest 2-story house, Darren Watkins Jr., better known online as Ishowspeed, was sprawled out on his couch, one sock on, one sock off, lazily scrolling through his phone. The living room was cluttered, not messy, just lived in. A half-empty water bottle sat on the coffee table. An open bag of chips rested beside a PlayStation controller, and a pair of sneakers lay abandoned near the door. His house wasn't anything fancy, but it was home. A cozy spot just outside of Cincinnati, where the streets were familiar, and the people were the same ones he'd seen since childhood. It wasn't the kind of place where much happened, and to be honest, that was part of why he liked it. His mom, Lisa, walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Darren, you just gonna lay there all night?" "Mom, I'm chillin'," he mumbled without looking up. She sighed, shaking her head but smiling slightly. "You still going on that trip tomorrow?" "Yeah," he said, finally sitting up. "Me, Jay, and Malik. Gonna hit up that haunted house down in Kentucky. You know, the crazy one that makes you sign a waiver." Lisa gave him a skeptical look. "You sure that's a good idea?" "I don't like those places. People go in fine and come out different." "Mom, it's just for fun. It's content. People love seeing me freak out." She muttered something under her breath, but let it go. Darren knew she wasn't a fan of his over-the-top reactions online, but at the end of the day, she supported him. Outside, the sky had deepened into a soft purple, the streetlights flickering on one by one. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and the faintest hint of barbecue from a house down the block. It was the kind of night that felt peaceful, predictable, and yet, somewhere in the back of Darren's mind, there was a nagging feeling, a feeling he couldn't quite place. The next morning came slow and steady, sunlight filtering through the blinds and casting slanted golden lines across Darren's bedroom wall. His phone buzzed somewhere under his pillow, the vibration dull against the fabric. He groaned, reaching blindly until his fingers found the device. A group chat notification. "Jay, wake up, bro. We leaving at 12. Malik, don't be late like last time." Darren rubbed his face, blinking away sleep. He had stayed up too late again, bouncing between gaming and watching random YouTube videos until his brain blurred into exhaustion. The plan felt real now, no longer just a casual idea thrown around in a Discord call. He had agreed to this, driving down to Kentucky, signing a waiver that basically said, "If you lose your mind, that's on you," and stepping into a place that people called the scariest haunted house in America. He exhaled, sitting up and stretching. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that only existed in the early morning before the day truly started. Downstairs, the faint sound of the coffee machine gurgling meant his mom was already up. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the crispness of the autumn breeze slipping through the slightly open window. He took his time getting ready, showering until the bathroom mirror fogged up completely, then throwing on a hoodie and some joggers. Nothing too serious, just a road trip with the guys. Content, that was the goal. By the time he made it downstairs, his mom was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone while sipping her coffee. She barely looked up. "You eating before you leave?" "Nah, I'll grab something on the way." She gave him a look, half concern, half knowing he wouldn't listen. "Drive safe, and don't do anything dumb." Darren grinned, grabbing his keys from the counter. No promises. Outside, the air had a slight chill, the kind that made you shove your hands into your hoodie pockets, but wasn't quite cold enough to be uncomfortable. The trees lining the street had started turning, their leaves a mix of burnt orange and deep red. A couple of neighbors were out, an old man raking leaves into neat piles, a woman jogging with earbuds in, completely in her own world. His car was parked in the driveway, still speckled with dust from his last road trip. He climbed in, turning the engine over, and sat for a moment, staring at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. He felt normal. Just another day, just another trip. And yet, in the quiet of the morning, there was a strange heaviness in his chest, like the weight of something unseen pressing just at the edges of his awareness. It was small, barely noticeable, the kind of feeling you could ignore if you wanted to. So he did. He pulled out of the driveway, turning up the music, letting the bass drown out the quiet. The drive started like any other road trip, music blasting, windows cracked just enough to let in the crisp autumn air and the usual back and forth banter between Darren, Jay, and Malik. The highway stretched ahead, lined with trees whose colors looked almost too perfect, like something out of a postcard. Everything felt normal. Jay sat in the passenger seat, lazily scrolling through his phone, occasionally laughing at something before shoving the screen toward Darren. "Bro, look at this. Someone actually passed out in that haunted house, like full-on collapsed." Darren glanced at the screen quickly before turning his focus back to the road. A blurry image of a guy being carried out by staff flashed by, his face pale, his expression frozen somewhere between exhaustion and something else. He smirked. Man, people always fake reactions for clout. Malik, sprawled in the back seat with a bag of chips, shook his head. "Nah, I read about this place. It's different. They mess with your head, like psychological horror type stuff." He crunched on a chip before adding, "People sign waivers, but some don't even finish. They say weird stuff happens there." Jay snorted. "Man, y'all are too deep into this. It's a haunted house. Actors, props, jump scares. That's it." Darren nodded, but the nagging feeling from earlier still lingered, quiet but persistent. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to the anticipation. The highway soon gave way to smaller roads, the kind that felt like they led nowhere. The trees grew denser, their branches stretching over the road like skeletal fingers, filtering the daylight into shifting patches of shadow. The further they drove, the quieter everything seemed to get. The usual hum of other cars faded. No passing trucks, no gas stations, no signs of life besides the endless stretch of woods. The GPS said they were on the right path, but something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a slow realization that the road ahead looked too empty, too still. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of civilization, just their car and the road. Malik leaned forward between the seats. "Yo, when's the last time we passed another car?" Darren frowned, glancing at the rearview mirror. The road behind them stretched long and empty, swallowed by the trees. He hadn't really noticed before, but now that Malik mentioned it, the silence felt heavier. Jay waved a dismissive hand. "Relax, bro. We're in the middle of nowhere, not exactly rush hour traffic." Darren nodded, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. It was subtle, like the world had shifted just slightly off balance, just enough to notice, but not enough to call it real. The road stretched on, endless and unfamiliar. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the thickening woods. The sky had dulled into a murky shade of gray, the kind that made it impossible to tell if the sun was setting or if storm clouds were rolling in. The silence inside the car had settled into something heavier now, the weight of it pressing against Darren's chest like a slow-building pressure. Then, the GPS stuttered. The robotic voice crackled, distorting into something almost unintelligible. Recalculating. Darren glanced down at the screen, his grip tightening on the wheel. The map flickered, the bright blue navigation line twisting and resetting itself. Turn left in. Static, then silence. There was no left turn. Malik leaned forward, his voice low. Yo, what the hell? There's nothing there. Darren's jaw clenched. He slowed the car instinctively, scanning the side of the road. Trees, just trees. No path, no signs. And yet, the GPS insisted. Jay shifted uncomfortably. Man, just keep going straight. This thing's trippin'. Darren nodded and pressed the gas. The car rolled forward, the tires crunching against the gravel where the pavement had started to give way. The road felt different now, less maintained, rougher, like they were driving somewhere they weren't supposed to be. The first sign that something was wrong came slowly, creeping in at the edges. The trees on either side of the road seemed closer. Their branches twisted, tangled, stretching toward the car as if they'd grown inches in the past few seconds. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't, pooling unnaturally in places where light should be filtering through. Malik sucked in a breath. Yo, did you see that? Darren didn't want to ask what. Jay sat up straighter. See what? Malik swallowed hard. I don't know. Thought I saw someone in the trees. Jay forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. Man, you just psyching yourself out. Then the radio switched on by itself. A burst of static erupted from the speakers, loud and shrill, making all three of them jump. Darren scrambled to turn the volume down, but the knob wouldn't move. The sound twisted and warped, shifting from pure white noise into something else. A whisper. Faint at first, buried beneath the crackling, like someone speaking just beyond the range of comprehension. The words were stretched, wrong, as if being dragged across the speakers from someplace far away. Then all at once, the engine sputtered, the car lurched, the headlights flickered, and the world outside the windshield shifted. For a split second, the trees, the road, the sky, everything seemed to bend us inward, collapsing in on itself like reality was folding. Darren barely had time to register the sensation before the car died completely. The headlights cut out. The dashboard went black. The car rolled to a slow stop in the middle of the empty road. Silence. Darren's breath came fast and shallow. His hands were clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that his knuckles had turned white. Malik and Jay sat frozen, their eyes wide in the dim interior. No one spoke. Then, a knock. A single, deliberate knock against the passenger side window. No one moved. The knock was soft, too soft, just a gentle tap against the glass, like a request rather than a demand. Jay's breath hitched. His wide eyes darted to the window beside him, but the darkness outside pressed against the glass like a solid wall, swallowing anything beyond it. Darren's heartbeat pounded in his ears. His grip on the steering wheel felt numb, his fingers tingling with cold. His mind screamed at him to do something, anything. But what? Turn the key. The car was dead. Run. Run where? Malik's whisper broke the silence. You heard that, right? No one answered. Then, another knock. Slower this time, more deliberate. Darren's breathing shallowed. Something about it felt off. Not just the sound, but the rhythm, like whoever was knocking wasn't in a hurry, like they were waiting for something. Malik's voice trembled. I'm not looking. Jay swallowed hard. I think I should... Before he could finish, the lock on the door clicked. It came from the passenger side. Jay's side. The unmistakable sound of the door unlocking itself. Jay recoiled, his hand flying to the handle, yanking it up in a panic, but it wouldn't budge. Nah, what the hell? Darren's body moved before his mind caught up. He reached for the lock controls on his side, frantically pressing them down. The lock snapped back into place. Silence. No movement. No knocking. Just the suffocating weight of whatever was out there, lingering just beyond the thin sheet of glass. Then, the whispering started. Faint at first, like wind slipping through the cracks of an old house. It slithered into the car, curling around them, stretching from every direction at once. The voices were layered, too many to count. Some sounded close, some sounded impossibly far. Darren clenched his teeth. Turn the key, man. His hand fumbled for the ignition. He twisted. Nothing. The whispers thickened. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were words. Now, half-formed and wrong, stretched too long, bent in ways human mouths weren't meant to speak. You shouldn't be here. The voice rasped right by Darren's ear. He jerked away violently, slamming his shoulder into the door. His breath hitched, his chest locking up like his body didn't know how to move anymore. Then Jay screamed. Darren's head snapped toward him just in time to see something pressed against the glass. A face, but not a face. Too smooth, too stretched. Its eyes were holes, endless and empty, swallowing the dim glow of the interior light. Its mouth was wrong, curving too wide, lips parting like it was about to say something. Then the window shattered. Glass exploded inward, shards catching the dim light as they sprayed across the car's interior. The sound was deafening, a sharp, splintering crack that cut through the thick, suffocating silence. Jay screamed, scrambling away, his back slamming against Darren's shoulder. Malik was shouting something, but the words barely registered. Everything blurred into raw, panicked noise. Darren's vision tunneled. The thing outside, that face, was still there, still pressed against the empty window frame. Its smooth, unnatural skin seemed to ripple, shifting like liquid under the faint moonlight. Its mouth moved, but no sound came. Then, it climbed in. Darren didn't think. He reacted. He lunged for the ignition, twisting the key with everything he had, knowing it wouldn't work, knowing it was dead. But then, the engine roared to life. The headlights flared, flooding the road with harsh, blinding light. The moment it hit the creature, it recoiled, jerking back in a way that was all wrong, limbs folding inward like it had been sucked into itself. And then, it was gone, vanished, not into the woods, not down the road, just gone. Darren didn't stop to question it. He slammed the gas. Tires screeched against gravel, the car fishtailing before lurching forward, tearing down the empty road at breakneck speed. Malik was gasping for breath in the back seat. Jay's hands were shaking violently against his lap, but no one spoke. No one looked back. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. Darren didn't know how long he drove, how far he had gone before the suffocating weight in the air finally lifted, before the world started to feel real again. The GPS flickered back on, recalculating. Then, as if nothing had happened, it resumed giving directions. Darren's fingers clenched the wheels so hard they ached. His mouth was dry, his pulse still hammering in his ears. Jay let out a hollow laugh, shaky, disbelieving. Tell me we just imagined that. No one answered. Malik swallowed hard. Where? His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. Where are we? Darren glanced at the GPS, expecting it to tell him they were miles from civilization, trapped in some dead zone of the map. But the screen showed something else entirely. A single, straight road, wasn't where they were supposed to be. That wasn't where they had been. Darren's breath came slow, shaky. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. The road ahead stretched on, dark and empty, and for the first time since they had started driving, he felt like something was waiting for them to arrive.